Doctrine and Covenants 115 to 120. Back in 1833, the Saints had been driven out of Jackson County, Missouri. Many of them found refuge in Clay County, where the residents accepted the Saints with the understanding that they were there only temporarily. However, 3 years later, the Saints were still there, and local residents were ready for them to move on. Luckily, church leaders had already been buying land in North Ray County. So when Clay County residents passed a resolution in the summer of 1836 asking them to leave, they agreed. By December, the Missouri legislature officially created Caldwell County, set aside specifically for church members. The Saints named their new settlement Far West, and by early 1837, they were planning a city and a temple and went to work. About 6 months after work on Far West began in earnest, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon relocated there with their families in the face of apostasy and violence in Kirtland. Though Joseph and Sidney were warmly welcomed by the church in general in Missouri, there were still troubles. Prominent church members W. W. Phelps and John Whitmer had recently been excommunicated, and David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery, who were also leaders in Missouri, were facing additional charges. When Joseph arrived, the local high council convened to address these charges, and both David and Oliver, Joseph's longtime friends and supporters, were excommunicated. This was a heartbreaking time for Joseph. It was at this time, on April 26, 1838, that Joseph received the revelation in section 115, clarifying that the city of Far West would be another city of Zion. While Jackson County still mattered, the Saints were to focus on building this new city of Zion for now. The Lord's faithful saints were to begin gathering there. With this revelation, and with 2 members of the First Presidency in Far West, it became the new church headquarters, and faithful saints began relocating there in droves. They built hundreds of homes, 4 dry goods stores, 3 family grocery stores, several blacksmith shops, 2 hotels, a printing shop, and a large schoolhouse that doubled as a church and a courthouse. Obviously, the Saints needed more space than they had in Far West, and so Joseph and others began scouting new areas, including into nearby Daviess County, for the Saints to expand into and build upon. In May 1838, Joseph and others traveled to a place called Spring Hill, near the Grand River, where Lyman White and others had already settled. It seemed like an ideal gathering place. Joseph's journal entry on May 19th records that the Lord revealed this land to be Adam-ondi-Ahman, the very spot where Adam would someday return to meet his people, fulfilling a prophecy from the book of Daniel. The name was not new. Earlier revelations had referenced Adam-ondi-Ahman, but this was the first time the Lord identified the physical location. In the last days, this sacred place will be the site of gathering where Adam, as a resurrected being, will return and receive priesthood keys from all past prophets, and then deliver them to Jesus Christ. This is part of the divine preparation for the second coming. Shortly after this revelation, church members began moving into the area. By June 28, 1838, the Adam-ondi-Ahman stake was officially organized. Hopes were high in the summer of 1838 for all these new cities of Zion and this new area of Missouri to be a place of peace for the saints. Kirtland by this time was largely abandoned by faithful saints. However, some were dragging their feet, understandably so. Uprooting your life, especially your home and business, wasn't easy. And with so many saints leaving Kirtland at the same time, it was incredibly difficult to sell property at a profit. 2 of the most prominent holdouts remaining in Kirtland were William Marks and Newell K. Whitney. On July 8, 1838, as Joseph and other church leaders met before church, many questions came up. As the questions came up, Joseph would ask the Lord for direction, and the revelations came. One such question was about these saints who had not yet left Kirtland. The Lord addressed them directly in section 117. It was time to move, now. William Marks was called to preside in Far West. Newell K. Whitney was to serve as a bishop in Adam-ondi-Ahman. The message was hand-delivered by Oliver Granger, who stayed behind in Kirtland to settle debts. This revelation used the phrase, "saith the Lord," more than any other section, perhaps as a way to emphasize that these were divine instructions, not just Joseph's opinions. Blessedly, both William Marks and Newell K. Whitney responded with faith and obedience. Others in the church, however, were struggling in their faith. By July 1838, the church had lost 4 apostles to apostasy. In the same leadership meeting on July 8th, Joseph received another revelation in answer to the simple but vital question, what now? The answer was to call new apostles. The revelation in section 118 named John Taylor, Johnny Page, Wilford Woodruff, and Willard Richards as the newest apostles of the Lord. The only problem? None of them were in the room, or even in Far West. The day after this meeting, the remaining apostles who were in Far West met with the First Presidency and officially notified the new apostles. Letters were sent out immediately with their callings. Wilford Woodruff was serving in the islands off New England. John Taylor was in Canada. Willard Richards was in England. He'd be ordained there in 1840. John E. Page was in Missouri, but wouldn't be ordained until December 1838. Another question that came up during this leadership meeting dealt with tithing. The church was still operating under crushing debt and heavy expenses. Bishops Whitney and Partridge had consequently been asking church members to pay tithing since late 1837, but no one knew how much tithing should be. They proposed options. Each household would pay a percentage of their income based on the needs of the church. One proposed number was 2%. But Joseph knew the Lord had the answer, and so in the same meeting on July 8th, he asked, "O Lord, show unto thy servants how much thou requirest of the properties of thy people for a tithing." The Lord revealed to Joseph that he required 1/10 of all interest annually. This clarified tithing not just as a donation, but as a spiritual law and a way to live the law of consecration in modern times. Joseph sent Brigham Young to find out what surplus saints had. When Brigham asked who should judge what surplus was, Joseph said, "Let them judge themselves." This principle continues today. Tithing is personal and between each member and the Lord. After the revelation on tithing came the next logical question. Who is going to manage these sacred funds? That answer came in what is now Section 120. A council would be created to oversee tithing. It consisted of the First Presidency, the presiding bishopric, and the High Council in Zion. This replaced earlier efforts like the United Firm and localized high councils, which had run into challenges. The first meeting of this council took place July 26, 1838, and its work laid the foundation for how church finances are still managed today, with careful stewardship and divine direction. Even though the saints likely felt that they were moving from Plan A to Plan B and possibly even Plan Z at this point, the Lord's plans were never frustrated. He helped the saints adapt to new circumstances and learn how to thrive in them. And that's what's happening in Come Follow Me this week.